Alright, so today we are going to be taking it back to basics, and I am specifically going to be talking to people who are interested in getting the tarantula hobby or new to the tarantula hobby. I'm basically going to cover a bunch of basic things that you should know, things that you should get, and things that you should not get, and just kind of guide someone through the process of getting their first tarantula. Now, if you already are an experienced keeper or you've been keeping a while, I am going to ask you guys for a little bit of help. If you could comment down below some pieces of advice, things that you've learned keeping tarantulas, things that helped you out, go ahead and comment all of that down below for them. I feel like that would be a really good resource on top of this video. Before we get into it though, just reminding you guys that Kewpie My Sea Elegance plushie is still out for pre-order. It is made to order and limited edition, so if you want one, you have to secure her like ASAP. I will put the link down below, and thank you so much to everybody who has supported. Okay, so we're gonna talk about step one, and this is going to be like the first thing you need to do. Ask yourself, are you getting a terrestrial or arboreal tarantula? A terrestrial tarantula is going to be one that will live in the substrate on the ground. They like to burrow, they like to web up, and you're going to need an enclosure that is going to be longer than it is higher. Or are you going to get an arboreal tarantula? Their enclosure is going to look more like this. It's going to be shorter in length, but it's going to be taller, and that's because they like to live and web up in the trees and the corner, and so it'll determine like how you set up your enclosure. You're also going to want to know what size tarantula you're going to get, because obviously that's going to dictate the size of the enclosure, the size of the water dish, the size of the feeder. So definitely figure out those two things first. Are you getting an arboreal or terrestrial? And are you getting a baby, a juvenile, a subadult, or an adult? In my opinion, for your first tarantula, I would suggest a terrestrial, and I would suggest a juvenile or a subadult. A juvenile is still going to be a young tarantula, but they're going to have some size to them. They're going to be a little bit more hardy than a sling would be. And terrestrials, I'm just personally more comfortable with. Plus, I feel like there's more options for like beginner tarantulas when it comes to the terrestrial species, such as Grammostola pulchra, Grammostola pulchra pes, Grammostola rosea. You can tell which genus I love the most. Also, Aphonopelmes. There's a lot of really good beginner species that are going to be terrestrial. So if you are looking for advice, aim for a terrestrial, juvenile, or subadult. Once you've had that figured out, you're going to move on to step two, which is selecting what enclosure you want to use for your tarantula. And this is like a pit of endless options. You can go in your cabinet and you can find a food storage container, poke some holes in it and use that. You can also go to many places, Dollar Tree or Target or any store that's going to sell like food storage containers. Those work great. Maybe they don't look the best, but they work fine for your tarantula, and they're really affordable and budget friendly. You can also look for storage containers. I think storage containers are great. Before tarantula cribs came along, a lot of my tarantulas were in storage containers, and it was just because they were easy to find and they were inexpensive. No, they don't look the best, but they work great. I got a set of 5 from Joann's for like $14. That's a steal right there. I'm always on the lookout for storage containers. They're great. Another option, of course, though, if you're at a pet store and you're looking for something, I absolutely love critter keepers. I love these kind of enclosures. I don't care what anybody says. When I first got into the hobby, tarantula cribs didn't exist. And you know what I used? Storage containers. But if I was feeling real fancy, I would go buy a tarantula one of these, and my goal was to have my whole collection of these because you can see through them, there's more clarity, and of course when you first get your tarantula, you're gonna want to view them, you're gonna want to see what they're up to, and food containers kind of lack that clarity that critter keepers have. Now this one was like about $8. These come in multiple sizes. Now if you want to step up from that, if you really want a beautiful display enclosure, you guys already know where I'm going with this. Tarantula cribs, my absolute favorite. I don't just work with tarantula cribs to work with them. I work with them because I genuinely love their enclosures, and they've also made me a part of the process of like designing some and things like that. So I've had a say in these, and they're just beyond everything else. Now they're going to be a little bit more pricey, but keep in mind they are warp resistant, they're scratch resistant, they're specifically designed for tarantulas, and they come in every size you can imagine, from a teeny tiny itty bitty sling to a large Goliath bird eating adult. You can find them in a variety of shapes, sizes, colors. And of course, if you shop with Tarantula Cribs, you can always use my affiliate code CAT10. It'll save you 10% and it genuinely helps out my channel a lot. So thank you to everybody who supports me that way. I really appreciate it. However, if you are looking for a display enclosure in like your typical pet store, I personally think that the Exoterras are really great for tarantulas. The only issue with them is the fact that they have a mesh lid. However, you can buy your Exoterra and then replace the mesh lid yourself. There's lots of DIYs, but also Tarantula Cribs does sell lid replacements for the Exoterras, which is freaking awesome. So if you go out to the pet store and you buy an Exoterra and you want to make the lid tarantula safe, you can go on their website and order one specifically for that size. I don't know if they have all sizes yet, but yeah. And if not, you can always just make your own. Like, this hobby can be very DIY based. Like, for example, I got these little mushroom bug catcher things from Target years and years ago, and I transformed these into little terrariums for tarantulas. So you can get really creative with the enclosures as well. So step 3, you are going to want to select your substrate. There's so many substrates that you can pick from. There's Eco Earth, which is like a coconut fiber. This is really inexpensive. It works, but it does have a tendency to mold. There's also Jungle Mix. Jungle Mix isn't my favorite, but it is a nice ready-made texture. A lot of tarantulas will thrive on it. It can mold, but it's not as bad as Eco Earth. There's also Reptisoil. Reptisoil is my favorite substrate. If you've been here a while, you already know I always use Reptisoil. I'm not sponsored. I just prefer that substrate. It's great. It does its job. It holds the humidity, and I've not had any molding issues with it. So I prefer it. There's other options out there too. There's more fancy options, I'm sure, but those are like the 3 major ones you're going to find in pet stores. Just beware, do not buy wood chips for your tarantula. Things like forest floor, those are going to be too pokey. They're not going to be good to burrow in. Also, don't put your tarantula on sand. I don't think people really do that very much anymore, but there was a period of time where people were keeping tarantulas on sand. Obviously, you don't want to keep your tarantulas on sand. They can't burrow in it. However, when it comes to wood chips and when it comes to sand and these like rocky substrates, it's always great to actually mix that in with whatever substrate you're using. So if you're using Eco Earth or a Reptisoil, if you want to mix some sand in there to get the burrows to hold better, that's always a great option. You can also mix in things like moss. There's sphagnum moss. I like sphagnum moss, but when it comes to moss, my favorite is obviously usually going to be frog moss. I just love frog moss. It's very pillowy, it's very green, and you can wet it and it kind of comes alive. Sometimes it turns yellow. That's okay though, I don't mind. And I do have a lot of tarantulas that like to rip this up and use it in their burrows, which I think is like some good enrichment for them. So always gonna recommend frog moss. If you can get some leaf litter and mix that in with your substrate, that's always great. I notice a lot of my tarantulas move it around, use it in their burrows, and it just also gives it like a really nice natural forest floor look. So yeah, substrate, very important, but also pretty easy. You can try multiple products and see which one's your favorite, but I personally just prefer Reptisoil at this point. So, I mean, I've been stuck on it for years now, and it's in pretty much every enclosure. Step 4, decor. Decor, you can get as creative or uncreative as you want with this. So, a good, safe thing to use when it comes to decor is going to be cork bark. I just saw this piece today, and I loved it. It's so pretty with this moss on it. I just absolutely love how cork bark looks. It's very natural. It doesn't tend to mold. It comes in a variety of shapes and sizes. You can break a little piece off for a sling. You can use a whole piece for a tarantula. They love this stuff. They burrow under it. You really just cannot go wrong with cork bark. That's why literally everybody uses it. That said, if you want something cute and fun, you can also like go online. There's plenty of people who sell fun hides. This is a cute little kawaii hide from Gummy House. And guess what? Your spider genuinely does not care if it's hiding under a piece of cork or if it's hiding under a cute little house like this. You're also going to want to incorporate some kind of plants or greenery if you can. This can be as simple as going up to your pothos at home, snipping a piece off, propagating it, and putting it in the soil. It'll do fine in there. And even if the plant dies, guess what? They'll still use it. They'll still hide in it. They'll still web it up. It'll be all right. You can also go to the pet store and you can pick out some fake plastic plants, but I'm gonna tell you, they are so expensive. It's like $10 for a plant plant that's like this big a lot of times, and they're kind of sharp and pokey, and a lot of times they're really ugly. So honestly, what I would do and what I like to do is I go to Michael's or any place that has like floral plants. Even Dollar Tree is a great option. You can totally use those plants. Just make sure you rinse them off a little bit, but I've never had an issue with it. You just, you know, you don't want to grab something that's like very like going to leach like dyes and stuff. I really like Michael's. I like these kind of plants. Like as you see, these are not going to leach any kind of dyes when you get them wet. And I think this was like $1 maybe or $2 for this bunch. Honestly, like the plastic plants from Michael's are like really great. They're on sale a lot of times too. They almost look real. They're not gonna die if your tarantula burrows into the roots or rips it up or webs it up, you know? Some people really hate plastic plants. I'm kind of on the fence. I'll do natural if I can, but I do think there's a place for plastic plants, especially if you have like a heavy webber. Like a green bottle blue would web something like this up a lot. It would give them lots of anchor points. You can also go to like fairy garden sections at certain stores, and they'll oftentimes have like little mushrooms that you can add. These are not detrimental to your tarantula's happiness, but they're nice. You know, a lot of people want to set up the enclosure to be visually appealing. You know, you can have fun with this as well. Step 5, a water dish. I know, what a debated topic. All of my tarantulas are provided a water dish. Whether they choose to keep the water dish or make it a part of their enclosure is up to them. I do periodically replace water dishes after they become a part of the enclosure, but after a certain point, I usually resort to just misting in a corner. It's more work if you don't have a water dish. You're gonna have to mist your tarantulas more often to make sure that they're hydrated. But I do offer water dishes. You can go as cheap or as fancy with this. You can use the caps of water bottles. Those work great. You can use little plastic deli cups that you buy in like a pack. Those also work great, like the sauce cup. You can get fancy with it. These are some cute Gummy House 3D printed water dishes. I think they're really cute. So if I have a 3D printed water dish, that works great. I actually bought multiple huge bags of these for very cheap, and they are from a tattoo ink pot maker on Instagram. I would suggest doing that before purchasing one from a pet store personally, just because their water dishes are insanely expensive and it's like unnecessary to spend that much on a water dish. One of the last things we are going to talk about, but possibly one of the most important, is feeders. When it comes to feeders, there are so many options. I got a ton of feeders just recently from Dubia.com. Dubia.com sponsors this channel. They're awesome. They have a ton of feeders and they have the most inexpensive feeders, so definitely check them out. If you want to order some, they just get delivered to your door. They have a huge variety. So these are dubia roaches. You can feed your tarantulas dubia roaches. Just be aware that they do tend to burrow, and they're also not legal everywhere. So check your local laws. I don't think they're legal in Canada or Florida. Not 100% sure on that. Like I said, just check your local laws. My favorite is, of course, the infamous gummy worms. I absolutely love gummy worms. These are a great hydrating meal. No, you do not want to feed your tarantulas the gummy worms, only gummy worms. It's not good for them. You do want to do a variety of roaches and different worms and crickets if you're comfortable with it. I do feed crickets a lot. Actually, it's one of my favorite feeders, to be honest. Yes, crickets are stinky. Yes, crickets are loud, but they're an easy feeder because they wander around and they're not going to burrow, and tarantulas love them. So gummy worms, they're always going to be one of my favorites as well. Another option, of course, is super worms. If you put a super worm in your tarantula's enclosure and your tarantula doesn't immediately eat it, it will burrow to the bottom. It will turn into a beetle, and yes, that can be a threat to a molting tarantula, and a lot of times tarantulas will not eat the beetles. However, I have had several large tarantulas eat the beetles. I know this because of the evidence it left behind. So if you do super worms, just know you do not want them to go underground and turn into a beetle. And then if you have like a really small tarantula, you're going to want to use fruit flies. This is a huge headache, but hey, you got to feed really small tarantulas sometimes, and that's where those come in. I also have some crickets I could show you, but I think you all know what a cricket looks like, and they got kicked out to a different room because they were being too loud. So for the last step, I just want to talk about what you don't need and what you do need. So first, let's talk about what you don't need. You don't need to buy a heat bulb. You don't need to buy a heat lamp. You don't need to buy a heat pad. As long as your room is like mid to high 60s, you don't really need any external heat. If you do need to supply some kind of heat, I personally would recommend a space heater in whatever area you're keeping your tarantulas. The average person, the average keeper, does not need to get a heat pad, and they don't need to get a heat lamp. Is it gonna cook your tarantula? Probably not. This was like a rumor that I also believed, that if you use a heat lamp or a heat pad, your tarantula will be attracted to the heat and they'll overheat and cook themselves. I'm starting to choose to believe that. It is a rumor. I don't think it's gonna necessarily hurt them, but is it gonna benefit them? That's kind of up for debate, but probably not. Another thing that I personally wouldn't spend money on that I see some people buy is like one of those little gauges that tells like the humidity and the temperature. I just don't think you need it for a tarantula, to be honest. As long as you're like keeping up with like misting and a water dish, as long as they're at like a comfortable room temperature, you just don't necessarily need to spend money on that. You can though if you want, but I wouldn't. And now lastly, let's talk about extra things that I think you do need. Some feeding tongs, and you're gonna want multiple pairs. The bamboo pairs work great. I personally like this one the most because it has this bent end and it's just really easy to do a lot of feeding. I love these ones. These are my favorite ones. You're gonna lose them all the time. I am so surprised that I still have not lost my favorite pair, but buy like 3 pairs. Even if you have 1 tarantula, buy like 3 pairs. Another thing you're going to want to invest in if you end up getting more than 1 tarantula is a label maker. As we talked about last video, I got some tarantulas mixed up because I didn't label them. So make sure you're labeling your spiders so you know who is who. And last thing you're going to want to get is a water bottle. Probably not this kind though. This is a Thrive brand. It is not good. I hate this water bottle. I had another one before it. This one leaks all the time. I don't know what the deal is. If anybody has this water bottle, can you tell me if it sucks for you too? Because it just sucks for me. But you're gonna want to get some sprayers so that you can mist your tarantulas. But yeah, I would definitely suggest investing in those things, as well as just like a pothos plant. If you can get like a big pothos plant and let it grow out, you can snip it as much as you want and propagate it and use that in so many different enclosures, and that'll save you a ton of money, less plastic in the world. Those work great. And that's pretty much all I can think of. I'm sure there's more. I'm sure people are going to be commenting stuff that I forgot in the comments. And yeah, hopefully this helps you guys out. Like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're not and you want to be. Don't forget I have an Instagram. It was probably way too much. It's at Tarantula.Kat. You can go follow me there. Tarantulakat.com. Go check it out, and I will see you guys soon. Let's get into the member picks.